person this evening. For just unexpected reasons, we've had a little swap around. So Vajradevi was going to be introducing a Karshapala who he recently ordained. But that's going to be happening in 2 weeks' time. Just go. And instead, I'm going to be doing the talk that I would otherwise have done in 2 weeks' time. So it's another awakening talk in the series that we're having, where we've got talks different weeks, focusing on different aspects of the vision of the center, the Buddhist center. And this is the awakening strand, if you like, of the vision. Last week was also an awakening talk, I believe, with Jyoti Dana on the taste of freedom. And this series is focusing on talks that Sangharakshita gave, our founder gave many years before in lots of cases, and it's to sort of re-look at them in the light of our own experience and the light of changing times. So part of the center vision is to offer a path to awakening. That's why it's one of the strands of the vision. Through talks, through study, through what we call Kalyana Mitrata, so through friendship, and many other things. So this evening, I'm going to be talking about one of Bante's talks. It's a different sort of metaphor to the taste of freedom. This talk is called Breaking Through to Buddhahood. So it has a different sort of feel to it. So I'll say a little bit about the context. It was given by Sangharakshita, Bante, 52 years ago. So in 1969, and you'll hear, Bethany's going to be playing a few quotes, and you'll hear some of the, in a way, it's setting itself in the time through some of the little quotes that we'll hear in his voice. So Triratna was at that point called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. It was 2 years old. And the order, the Buddhist order, was only 1 year old. It had been started the year before. And in fact, this is an anniversary talk of the second year of the founding of the movement and the first year of the founding of the order. It's a pretty long talk. It's an hour and 21 minutes. So obviously I'm going to have to be quite selective about what I go into, but I do recommend it. It's a talk that's well worth listening to. Bhante starts by talking about breaking through, not breaking through to Buddhahood, but just breaking through. And he says that the movement, this really young movement that he's just set up, is an example of breaking through, or a breakthrough. It represents a breakthrough on its own level from what was available in British Buddhism at the time. So there were lots of organizations around. The Buddhist Society in London, I think, was one of the best known, but there were others. And Bhante says they all sort of played their part in bringing, if you like, and helping Buddhism become established in the West and in the UK. But he particularly mentions, and this is sort of by the by, that the oldest Buddhist society at the point he was giving the talk in 1969 was one that had been started in 1923, and that was the Shropshire Buddhist Society. So I thought that was quite a nice little bit of synchronicity. And in 1969, it only had one member left. And apparently this member was quite elderly, very active and quite militant. So there you go. That's the tradition that as Salopians we're growing from. Yeah, so one thing about all these organizations that Bhante talks about in the talk is that they're cloaked in respectability. And he talks about this one woman who actually was quite proud that she considered herself a Buddhist for 12 years, but nobody at her workplace knew. She was quite proud that she'd managed to keep it a secret all that time. So it wasn't, you get the sense it really wasn't something that touched people's lives in a very big way. That there was a lot of interest in the history of Buddhism, in the theory of Buddhism, but very little actual practice going on in the way that we understand it. And Triratna, according to Bhante, this small new movement started off in a basement shop in London, in Soho, changed that. It changed the face of British Buddhism. Because even that early on, Sangharakshita knew that he wanted a movement that helped people practice, that it helped them transform, helped us transform our lives. Practice that would affect the things like the type of work that we did, how much we worked, what we did with our money, the sort of food that we eat. In a way, the Dharma, the Buddhism's threaded right the way through our lives, our leisure activities, and most importantly, he says, our relationships with each other, how we relate to each other. So he says, Buddhism should be a transforming influence on our lives, a catalyst for change. So he sort of set the scene saying that this breaking through to a new way of practice, a new way of being a Buddhist in the late 1960s in Britain. Breaking through to real Buddhism is what he calls it. And then he goes on to talk about breaking through to Buddhahood, breaking through to awakening, to enlightenment. And he says he thinks that the spiritual life is characterized by two things, or two ways. One is what he calls the path of regular steps. So we carry on, we do our usual practice. We meditate, we meet with our friends to talk about practice, we go to our study group and our classes, and all the things that we do. We keep it going, and maybe we see small changes. And then every now and then there's a breakthrough, a bigger breakthrough. And he's particularly addressing that breaking through aspect, obviously from the title in this talk. And the breakthroughs that he's alluding to can be perhaps more dramatic than that sort of keeping going energy with the small changes, perhaps painful or charged, but certainly dynamic and abrupt. These are some of the words that he uses. But a breakthrough to a higher level of understanding, a breakthrough to seeing something much more clearly, whether an aspect of ourselves or the teachings. And I think Bhante's in quite rousing form through this talk. He uses language like spiritual dynamite. The spiritual life involves violence towards certain aspects of oneself, the obstinate and intractable parts. This is not usually how we talk about the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. Buddhism, properly and deeply understood, is revolutionary, he says. And I find it quite bracing, this sort of language. You can't sort of settle down with language like that, which I think is a good thing every now and again, to have that, to be woken up, if you like. And actually, I used to really like this language. I used to quite like it. And it expresses a lot of passion and strong ideals and strong energy. And I, in my 20s, had a lot of energy to throw at the spiritual life for a while. And now I'm a bit more ambivalent about Bethany looks relieved. Just a little bit more, but you know, what does it mean? Breaking through, smashing through, he says at another point. Yeah, so I've tried to connect with what it does convey to me now, a bit, and to some extent exploring it and reflecting on it has put me a bit more back in touch, right, with it. Yeah, something with what I used to like about that language of breaking through. One thing I think it does make me laugh. Actually, there's quite a lot of energy in it. It brings energy to the fore. So I think it frees up energy in a certain sort of way for me. But I think it also brings a sense of urgency. This idea that there's something that needs to be pushed through or broken through, that there isn't unlimited time. And it's easy, I find it easy to not to think rationally that there is unlimited time in my life to make spiritual progress, but in an unthinking, making assumptions sort of way, oh, you know, just somewhere in my being, I think there's unlimited time. I haven't quite clocked that there isn't. And that sort of, at times, feeling of wasting time or perhaps dawdling a bit through another box set or another, reading another thriller or something. Those sorts of things where I feel I'm not making the best use of my time. So I welcome the things that wake me up because they're more in line with reality. And this year, one of my sisters was diagnosed with a very serious illness. And it's sad, it's really sad. And it's reality. And I feel like it's waking me up just a little bit more. Just more reminders of how things are. And actually, I'm not going to last forever. None of us are. So that's one thing, this sense of urgency. The other thing I think is when I reflect on my name, particularly the Vajra part of my name. And we have a Vajra, I don't know if it probably can't be seen online, but I have a rather large Vajra on the shrine. They don't usually come that large. It's a large wooden Vajra. I was given it at the time of ordination by Amritamati, who some of you know. And so Vajra is sometimes translated as adamantine. It's the hardest material known, harder than diamonds, they say. Sometimes also translated as diamond thunderbolt. Yeah, it could smash some things, my Vajra. And unfortunately, when I was first ordained, I did get a bit of feedback about occasionally clunking people with my Vajra through, you know, just needing to learn in a way how to sort of wield, wield that energy with a bit more sensitivity. As it unfortunately still happens every now and again. But on the positive side, I value directness. There's something about that energy that's quite direct in communication, knowing where I stand. And I also, I think I really appreciate about the name is like not everything has to be really nice or really gentle, but can be vigorous and can be full of passion. Okay, so that's all by way of Bante's before he really gets going. So it's a simple structure. He says he's talking about what we break through, how we break through, and when and where we break through. So we break through everything that is mundane or conditioned, all of conditioned existence. And then he acknowledges this is a bit general. So he narrows it down to 4 areas to break through. So the first one is negative emotions, emotions that cause us suffering. And he particularly mentions greed, hatred, and fear. So rather than the more common sort of delusion, we've got fear, which is a secondary aspect of hatred. Primary negative emotions. And he says that we leak our energy. Our energy sort of leaks out of us when we express negative emotions, when we indulge in them. And he has a very sort of simple approach to working with negative emotions, but one that we're very familiar with, and that's the metta practice, cultivating feelings of loving kindness, cultivating the other Brahma Vihara practices, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And then later in the talk, he gives another way where he emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and awareness, really just being aware of negative emotions without getting lost in them and not, without suppressing them, but simply being able to be with them from the standpoint of awareness. So that's the first thing that we break through. The second thing is our psychological conditioning. And he defines this as factors that influence or determine our mental attitudes and behavior without us being aware of it, or only being aware of it to some extent. Somewhere else I've heard him say that working with our once we've overcome our psychological conditioning, we're 90% of the way to enlightenment. And I find that quite encouraging. Well, I did find it quite encouraging. I've since, I think, got more of a handle on how much of, how complex all that is, how much conditioning there is. And his recommendation at the time, and I don't know if that still stands, but his recommendation was to go and live in a different country from the country of your birth, to go and live somewhere where the conditioning was different. And in that way, you would come up against your own conditioning, the things that annoy you because they're not done the way that you're used to them, or the things that surprise you and think, what on earth are they doing it like that? I had my own little experience of this. Well, I spent a lot of time in Spain for over a period of 3 or 4 years. But I remember one time going to a little exhibition. It was on the coast, and I can't remember what it was about. But Sir Francis Drake was in this part of this exhibition. So, I knew him as an explorer, a favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, a sea captain. He made the Queen of England very, very rich. So I was a little bit surprised and taken back to see the little card underneath this image, or this or possibly a paper mache thing of Sir Francis Drake said pirata. Does everybody know what pirata? No, pirata in Spanish is pirate. So they saw him in quite a different way, and then, fair enough. Fair dues. He'd actually ran a lot of the riches that he took back was from Spanish ships that he'd pirated from. So, little example. Well, what it made me think of in relation to us now, I mean, lots of us spend time in other countries. It's something that we do an awful lot more travel perhaps than people were doing in the 60s. So I wondered if it's more that we might expose ourselves to a sort of Triratna conditioning, if you like, sort of things that would still expose ourselves to how we're conditioned through our family circumstances, our education, our race and sexual orientation, all those things. Bante's talk predates things like Buddhists living together in communities, those were to come. And Buddhists working together in Buddhist businesses, right, livelihood businesses. And in a way, it feels like they've sort of had an arc, and they're in 50 years, their star rose, and it's gone down a little bit. But I still have a lot of confidence in those structures. I know that a lot of the order members in this centre have spent significant amounts of time either working in Buddhist businesses or living in Buddhist communities, and probably any of us could speak to the value of that. And the value is often seen in terms of them being quite intense. You would come up against different people's ways of doing things. Bhante talked about those crucial situations. So I've just come up with a few ways that I think it's still possible for us to do that. The opportunities are still there if we remember to look for them, or we get reminded about them. So you could try volunteering for a few weeks or a few months at Taraloka Women's Retreat Centre, or Vajradevi, the moment a men's retreat centre. A few months living and working there would be amazing. Or the Dharma Life course. These courses go on a couple of times a year at Adhisthana, quite often for young people, but I think not always. And I think one of our Sangha members, Alan, did a 5-month course there a couple of years ago. And then I was thinking of a Karana appeal, where you spend 6 weeks in a community with people that you don't necessarily know, and you work and you do door knocking work. And Abhayanara's done one of those. I think Vajradevi's done a couple of those. Really intense working grounds for practice, that real potential for breaking through. And for a really, really good cause. It's raising money for the Dalit community in India. Other things closer to home, you could form a community to live together, practice together. Even on a temporary basis. I know that I think it was Sarabantu, Steph and Luce formed a community for about 6 weeks to live together. I think while Abhayanara was on his Karana appeal. And things like just being on a class team, really committing to showing up every week on a class team is an opportunity to practice with others and learn, rub up against ourselves, and in the process learn about cooperation and communication. So that's the second one, I think. Yep. So the third thing that Bhante talks about is rational thinking. He does talk about how important the rational mind is and how far it's brought us. But then he goes on to say, and we're going to hear this in his own words. I think this is quite striking. So, yeah.
Now, thirdly, breaking through rational thinking, breaking through the rational mind itself. And this kind of breaking through is indeed difficult to imagine. We can well understand the need for breaking through our negative emotions. These are evidently undesirable. We can even understand, with a bit of an effort, can understand at least theoretically, intellectually, the need for breaking through psychological conditionings. But well though we understand this, well though we understand the need to break through negative emotions and psychological conditionings, it is, after all, the rational mind that is understanding all this. And now that mind is being asked to contemplate, being asked to agree to its own dissolution, its own destruction. And this is very difficult indeed. And it's terrifying to experience this, even as an idea, even as a thought, even as a concept. Now, the rational mind is an extremely important faculty. It's been developed over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. The rational mind is the chief instrument of human survival. And it's natural that the rational mind should be valued, and valued very highly. But it should not be overvalued. The rational mind is invaluable for practical purposes. After all, it was the rational mind that discovered fire. It was the rational mind that invented the wheel. And more recently, it's the rational mind, the rational intelligence, that has created the aeroplane. And it's the rational mind that split the atom. And it's the rational mind that is at present planning to land a man on the moon. And man, the rational mind, may well achieve all this. It's not impossible. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility. But, and it's a very big but indeed, the rational mind may do all this, may achieve all this, may accomplish all this, and even more that we can't even imagine, that we can't even dream of at present. But the rational mind cannot know reality. Cannot know reality.
I really love that last line. The rational mind cannot know reality. We can only have a direct, non-conceptual experience of reality. So one of the ways that Bhante suggests, if you like, bringing in a more non-rational element to our lives is through myth, symbolism and legends. And I think maybe this is one of the reasons why he, I don't know, but why he, in a way, when he started ordaining people, we got to choose a visualization practice, a practice that explored visually enlightenment from a visual perspective rather than a conceptual perspective. So we've got a couple of figures on the shrine, and I'm going to ask Bethany if you could share the red one, not the blue one. Okay, so sharing, and we're looking at the red one in the shrine room. So we're looking at Kurukula, who is a red Dakini, or a form of red Tara. And she's one of the figures that I've taken on as a visualization after ordination. I've ended up taking on two wrathful figures, which is maybe why I'm particularly suited to giving this talk on breaking through. So Kurukula, she's got the fangs. She's a semi-wrathful figure, but she really represents the non-rational she's got a very, very wacky visualization, which I'm not able to tell you about. You'll have to take my word for it. There's strong elements of destruction and alchemy in it. It's like out of destruction arises something else. She's got this arrow, bow and arrow. So she shoots arrows and she has some sort of hook as well, and it's basically to ensnare by fascination. So she looks to sort of fascinate through her being and her beauty to draw people into the teachings. So I took this on when I was going through quite a sort of witchy phase, and I was very curious about magic. Good friends were buying me magic, and I was looking into how I could make magic wands and that sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely relate to that sort of fascination element in her and being fascinated by her. But in an earlier phase of my connection with her, before I really quite knew who she was, I had this image, and I had it on my shrine for years, smaller one. I sort of had a sort of, I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but a sort of human imagined avatar, you would say these days, of her. And she represented something of a wounded hero, an inner wounded hero. And there was a particular film that I really associated with her, which some of you may have seen. It's an Arnold Schwarzenegger film called Red Sonja. And somehow Curricula, Red Sonja became her sort of human, unenlightened sort of aspect. And I connected to this aspect really strongly. I had a whole sort of imaginative realm for her. She lived on an island, and she dressed in quite sort of ragged strips of leather and leather boots. And she carried around, she was red, and she carried around a mink. It was her familiar, and this mink mainly lived on top of her shoulder. Yeah. What more can I say? So there's a lot of energy in that. There's quite a lot of energy in imagination, in really freeing up the mind, and letting aspects of the psyche become sort of freer and a bit more sort of realized. Okay, so moving on. So the fourth thing is the Bhante talks about is time sense, and he talks particularly about breaking through what he calls clock time or mechanical time, and breaking through to organic time. He says we've lost the natural self-regulating rhythm of life when we're bound by clock time. Later, he says we have to smash the clock, or at least allow it to run down. So there's another possibility if you don't, not quite up to smashing the clock. He says clock time is security, and via the planning mind. This is a very interesting idea, I find. So, and I really sort of can recognize it in myself, the degree to which I'm a slightly forward-oriented person rather than looking back. So therefore that planning mind is quite strong. I'm doing this until this time, and then I'm doing that. And even if it's planning in doing nothing, there's usually some sort of plan. The mind seems to do it a lot. And there's still vast parts of the world. I was thinking today, because I was thinking about my brother who lives in the South Pacific in Vanuatu. And there's parts of the world where they don't really have clock time. My brother, he's a chef, an executive chef, and he has quite a lot of trouble with people not turning up to work. And eventually they roll in a few days late. And he says to them, where have you been? And they just say, oh, didn't need to, went fishing. And they live very simply. So if they've got, they drink this sort of spirit that they make from roots grown under the ground. So they grow a lot of stuff, and they fish for a lot of stuff. And they might need money for a few other things, oil or beer or something. And then it's, well, I didn't need to. My brother actually quite likes this. It's a bit frustrating for him, but at the same time, that's why he lives in Vanuatu, because there's more reliance on organic time than there is on clock time, even if he's the one who's got to get the meals out to the customers. So I think we can touch organic time more in our lives if we bear it in mind, actually, just bear in mind time free from technology, not just clocks actually, but time free from tech that in a way is always demanding our attention, always bleeping at us or blinking at us, and in a way that sort of connection where we're always available to be connected with. So I think a letting go of that can be quite freeing. But a practice of doing nothing, even if, like I say, even if you have to plan it in, it's still better than not doing it. Just sitting with a cup of tea, better still going on solitary retreat and just being able to take your watch off for a week. You eat when you're hungry, you sleep when you're tired, you walk when you want to, you meditate and do puja when you're inspired to do so. But usually on solitary retreat, you're in nature, and the role of nature, I think, is really helpful if we can tune in more to the seasons, the changes in the cycle of the moon. For a while, Kashraj was doing full moon pujas here. I don't know if you still are. But and we were doing them outside for a while, and there was this real sense of actually registering that the moon was full and we were sitting underneath it. That was quite beautiful. I remember being in Sweden on retreats a couple of years ago, and with a friend, I was suddenly rushing outside. We were up chatting really late and rushing outside about midnight, because even though it was only sort of dusky, the new day was starting to come up at midnight, because it was around. So being in touch with the seasons and allowing those to affect our hibernatory impulses, or our impulses to really be alive. Okay, so I'm going on a bit here, so I'll try and dash through. So how we break through. Two things. The first thing Bhante says is keep going, doing what we do for those periods of doing our regular things are important. They're part of what leads to a breakthrough. They're part of the conditions. He says practice will accumulate to the point of breaking through. But then the other thing, and the second quote coming up, so the other thing is, he says, in fact, it's the first thing. He says, primarily we break through awareness, recollection, and mindfulness. And I'm going to play you a quote. This is a quote I use a lot on retreats that I lead, because I think it says a lot.
Breaking through in general, breaking through anything, breaking through any aspect of conditioned existence, any aspect of the wheel of life, is accomplished mainly through the cultivation of awareness, mindfulness, awareness, recollection. Awareness, we may say, is the great dissolver of negative emotions. Awareness is the great dissolver also of the psychological conditionings, in fact of every other aspect of the conditioned within ourselves. So much so that we may even say that there's no spiritual life without awareness. To the extent that there is awareness, there is spiritual life. It's better, one might even say, to steal with real awareness than to do a puja without any awareness at all. An action, a thought, a feeling is spiritual to the extent that it is accompanied by awareness. And whatever it may be, if there is anything negative in it, anything that smacks of the conditioned, the awareness with which it is done, if that awareness is maintained, will sooner or later eat away all that conditions, all that negative side. So awareness is of paramount importance in the spiritual life. No spiritual life without awareness. No breakthrough, no breaking through without awareness.
Okay, it's pretty clear, isn't it? Okay, so when and where we break through. So Bhante says we don't usually break through when things are going well, unfortunately. But in times of crisis, when we're stretched and tested, and he uses the example of the Buddha, basically had got to a point where he said, you know, Buddhahood or death, you know, and he sat there willing, at the point of his enlightenment with that attitude. He'd got to a crisis. But I think, other sorts of crises, like times of illness, times of loss, ruined plans. Sometimes when, you know, we've really sort of got our hopes up about something, or there's something that we're really, really looking forward to, and it doesn't happen. I was thinking of you, Vajradevi, and your big walk, and day 3, turn the foot over, the end of it. Until next May. Yeah. You can tell us later whether you broke through, what you broke through. So the other image we've got here, and we'll hear the third quote in a minute. So Bhante gives a description. This is wrathful Vajrapani. Maybe we could have him on the screen. Yeah, thank you. So there is a beautiful, peaceful form of Vajrapani, but I wanted the big, fat blue one. That was the one I went for. It's got a very strong feel of energy, and I connected with him on pretty much the first retreat that maybe it's the second retreat I went to. It was the very first retreat I went to at Taraloka. So he represents enlightened energy, energy for the good. And my sense with him was that with that much energy, that much energy requires you to have a lot of sensitivity to manage to handle that amount of energy. But I think my first impression, that came later, that impression, but my first impression was that he could just take anything that I could throw at him. He would be completely undaunted, and really a sort of meeting of energy. So he's got this, Bhante describes this fierceness, and he's got fangs and apparently a tongue that's dripping blood, and a terrible glare from his 3 eyes, and he's wearing human skulls and tiger skin. And in the tantric tradition, you wear what you've overcome. So he's the tiger represents fear. So Vajrapani has overcome fear. And he tramples on human bodies, which represents stamping out the forces of craving and ignorance. So there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of strong energetic symbolism. So I think Vajrapani is there for the times when something besides peacefulness and love is needed, something extra, that wrathful energy of breaking through. So Bhante, I'm going to play the final quote and just end with this. So Bhante's talking about what this figure represents. So we'll just hear.
This is the image of breaking through. This fearful or this wrathful or this terrific form represents the forces of enlightenment breaking, even bursting through the thick, through the dense darkness of ignorance and unawareness. This form this image represents transcendental consciousness at the moment of breaking through into Buddhahood. And the whole figure is surrounded by an aureole of flames. And what does this aureole of flames represent? Breaking through on any level, with regard to any medium, entails friction. Just as when the spacecraft re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, there is tremendous friction. And friction generates hate. And hate, when it reaches a certain point, a certain pitch of intensity, results in a conflagration, in a bursting into flames. So the wrathful Buddha, bursting through the conditioned, is therefore surrounded by this aureole of flames. And these flames consume, these flames burn up the darkness. These flames consume everything conditioned. And when everything conditioned is burned up, is consumed, is broken through, then breaking through into Buddhahood is complete, is accomplished.